"Come on, Eva, stop fussing, get ready, we're going to meet Uncle Steve," said Irene, critically examining herself in the mirror. "Mom, why do we need him? I love you, and you love me." "It's great just the two of us," replied little Eva with a serious tone. Barely hiding a smile, Irene noted with surprise how insightful her daughter had become. "She's only 10, but she thinks like an adult," thought the woman for whom her little one had been the meaning of life all this time. Then, with a slight reproach in her gaze directed at Eva, she said, "My dear, maybe we are good on our own. But you need to understand. You need a father, and I need a husband." Irene had raised her daughter alone, as if atoning for the mistakes of her youth when she had an affair with a passing biker. Of course, Irene now understood that relationship was a mistake, but as it's well known, you can't change the past. However, every cloud has a silver lining. If Victor hadn't left her then, perhaps she would have remained as plain Irene, a librarian, an unnoticed grey mouse, living paycheck to paycheck. But, left alone with a baby daughter, she had to use all her mental and physical abilities, the hidden potential of which Irene hadn't even realized before. Being an orphan, Irene could only rely on herself. The school of life she experienced in the orphanage had strengthened her character, instilling self-confidence. After finding herself in a challenging situation, the young woman surprisingly discovered her passion for commerce and business. Irene started with distributing advertising leaflets and selling flowers at the subway station. Then, the ambitious young woman ventured into the hairdressing and beauty center industry, where she progressed from being a simple manicurist to owning her own beauty salon. The first success and initial earnings uplifted Irene, and after some time, she fortified her position in this business. Now, she was firmly on her feet, managing a chain of beauty centers, flower pavilions, and boutiques selling clothes from elite brands. However, there was a downside to all of this. Despite having no financial constraints, Irene felt terribly lonely and longed for a dependable life partner. It deeply hurt her to sleep in a cold, empty bed and to greet the dawn alone. Irene yearned for romance, flowers given with and without reasons, and morning kisses from a loved one. So, when Irene met Stephen on a dating website, she immediately decided that this was her chance to find happiness and she shouldn't let it slip away. The handsome and charming brunette, looking at her from his profile picture, instantly won Irene's heart, even though they hadn't met in person yet. While interacting online, Irene found herself feeling very comfortable with the young man, who she considered to be the epitome of a real man. However, Stephen acted somewhat strange in the beginning. The guy had frequently scheduled meetings in restaurants or cafes, but would always cancel at the very last moment for some reason. Stephen attributed this to personal issues and a heavy workload. Irene's frustration reached its peak when Stephen, once again, set up a meeting at a nearby cafe. Impatiently glancing at her mobile phone screen, Irene expected her virtual suitor to cancel the meeting yet again. But to her surprise, he didn't. Stephen greeted them at the cafe entrance, with a bouquet of roses for Irene and a small plush teddy bear for Eva. The little girl took the gift with suspicion. Even though Uncle Stephen tried to come off as kind and caring, Eva didn't like him one bit. She sensed hostility and insincerity emanating from him. He reminded her of a carnival barker who, while flashing a broad smile to the customers, felt absolutely no genuine emotion for them. All evening, Stephen cracked jokes and shared fascinating stories, which immensely delighted Irene. She hadn't relaxed and enjoyed herself like this in a long time and felt on top of the world. When it was time to leave and pay for dinner, Steve suddenly, somehow strangely hesitated, complaining that he had dropped his wallet somewhere. "Steve, forget it. I don't even want to hear about it. I'll pay for everything now," Rachel said generously, leaving the waiter a very generous tip. Stephen escorted Rachel and Ava to the front door of their house, where they warmly said goodbye, exchanging sweet kisses on the cheek. "Well, how do you like Uncle Steve, Ovi?" Rachel asked when she and her daughter entered the apartment. Mom, I didn't like him. He is cunning and his eyes are cold. Oh, come on, daughter, how can you know about men's eyes? Oh, my dear, my little troublemaker, go brush your teeth and go to bed. The time is already late, Rachel commanded, not taking her daughter's words seriously. And little Ava, covered with a blanket with her head, mentally asked God that her mother was not friends with Uncle Steve. Ava didn't like him at all, and his jokes were incomprehensible and not funny, whether it's Uncle Bob from the next door. That's a human being. After all, he was the one who fixed my bike and replaced the camera when I ran over a nail. And he also has a son, Tommy. That's such a friend. You can trust him with a secret and ask for help in case of something. It's just a pity that he doesn't have a mother, thought Ava, tossing and turning in bed. With Tom, they had been friends since kindergarten and Ava often visited his house. Uncle Bob was very fond of animals and he had 2 cats, a small dog and more fish in an aquarium that occupied about half a wall in the hall. Earlier, there was also a turtle named Tortilla, but due to the fact that she was sad alone, Uncle Bob released her to her relatives in the city pond. Already falling asleep, Ava thought, oh, if only Mom and Uncle Bob could be friends, that would be great. But the girl did not know that Rachel fell in love with Steve at first sight. It happens when you meet a person and you like everything about him. About himself, the man told little. He said that he was new in town and had achieved everything himself, working as a manager in some company on the outskirts of the city. Rachel, who felt an incredible uplift in her soul, was ready to follow him, even to the ends of the world. Steve also knew how to dazzle and show himself in the best light. Flowers, gifts, and restaurants replaced each other with amazing regularity. Things were heading towards a wedding, though friends and acquaintances all advised Rachel not to rush. Why do you need to tie yourself down with marriage? Just live together for now. Many people do that these days. Simple and secure. If things don't work out, you just part ways, no court battles or messy divorces. But in response, Rachel just brushed off such comments, thinking that her friends were simply jealous of her happiness. Of course, if they had a catch like him, I'd like to see their reaction. Everyone knows how to be envious. Usually, men aren't too eager about marriage, but Stephen was practically begging, trying to convince Rachel about the importance of making their relationship official. Darling, why are we acting like children? Always meeting in motels and hotels? Let's just live together like all normal people. Have a baby. Get a cat and a dog. Hearing this, Rachel was immediately brought to tears and she threw herself into her beloved's arms. He's the one. Her destiny. How could there be any doubts? Rachel thought, agreeing with Stephen about the urgency of their marriage. They had a grand wedding. Rachel spared no expense and she wanted to remember this event forever. After the ceremony, the couple moved into a spacious apartment that Rachel had bought just for this occasion. Moreover, she gave her husband a truly lavish wedding gift, a brand new car. Probably the only one sad at the wedding was Ava, who understood that Uncle Steve wasn't as simple as he seemed. But when you're only 10, it's hard to go against your parents' will, so Ava had to accept the situation and move on. Time flew, and before they knew it, half a year had passed. A trusting relationship never developed between Ava and her stepfather. Deep down, they both harbored ill feelings for each other. Tom, you know, my new dad is kind of weird. He often disappears somewhere while Mom's at work. Spends money left and right and wants a new car, even better than the last one, Ava confided to her friend one day. Well, he can afford it. He's rich. But my dad, he works in a factory. He could buy me a car too, but only a toy one, Tom replied sadly. His mom had passed away years ago, and his father raised him alone, putting aside his own life to provide everything necessary for his son. One day, Ava accidentally overheard a very strange phone conversation of Uncle Steve's. That morning, she had headed to the playground but halfway there, remembered she'd left her ball behind. With a heavy sigh, she had to return for it. Quietly opening the front door, she immediately heard the loud voice of Uncle Steve coming from the bedroom. "Yes, Lenny. Everything stands. Of course, I've missed you. What's there to discuss? Tomorrow, my shrew will be off on a business trip, and then we can let loose." "Yep, me too. Kisses, kitten." After hearing all this, Ava turned as red as a lobster and dashed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. At the playground, she sat almost until evening, crying and smudging tears all over her face. She probably would have stayed there all night if her mom hadn't come to get her after returning from work. "Ava, honey, what happened? Why are you crying? Who upset you?" Mom, there's something." "It's about Uncle Steve," the girl stammered, quickly recounting to Rachel everything she had inadvertently overheard. After listening to Ava, Rachel's face darkened like a storm cloud. That evening, a serious conversation took place in the kitchen between Rachel and Steve. "Honey, why don't you trust me? Understand, I love you and I have no reason to lie to you. Do you believe me or your little liar? Shouldn't you know that kids at this age tend to fantasize? So, don't take the words of a 10-year-old at face value." "Well, if you don't trust me, let's get a divorce and be done with it," cunning Steve remarked, emphasizing the last sentence. All right. I admit, I jumped the gun. Jealousy got the best of me. Everything piled up at once, and I had a terrible day at work. Anyway, I'm sorry, it's not your fault," Rachel said apologetically, hugging her beloved husband. Since then, Steve has harbored a grudge against his stepdaughter, considering her the culprit of all his troubles. One day, left alone with Ava, he said, "Listen to you, little one, if you make one more peep in my direction, I'll strangle you first, and then your mom. Stay out of my business and mind your own. So, live as a bird, but don't tweet." After these words, Ava was finally convinced that Uncle Steve was not who he claimed to be. Realizing that her mother would no longer believe her words, the girl decided to act more decisively. Now, Ava began to closely monitor her stepfather, intending to collect evidence of his lies. The girl, not for the first time, noticed how Uncle Steve for some reason takes the keys to their old apartment and disappears there for a long time. Ava shared her suspicions with her friend Jake. "I know what he's doing there, something bad, but I can't prove anything. Mom, just taking my word for it, won't believe me anymore. Listen, let's put a camera there. My dad and I have one. We installed it when someone sprayed paint on the stairwell and left indecent drawings," Jake suggested. "What if it doesn't work out?" "Don't worry, be cool. I saw Dad setting it up. Everything is simple there. It's no more difficult than digging into a smartphone," Jake reassured the girl. The next day, the guys started to implement their idea. Knowing that Uncle Steve goes to the apartment, mostly in the afternoon, the children, taking the keys, installed the camera in the morning. Feeling like spies, the guys giggled happily, shaking hands. "Well, now the record can be stored on the computer, or on the phone, optional. In generally consulted with my dad, however. I said that we need it to watch the squirrels in the park," said Jake, who really wanted to help Ava's trouble. Now, all that was left was to hope that everything would work out. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait long. After lunch, Uncle Steve, as usual, went to the old apartment, where he stayed almost until evening. The next morning, Ava got up early and handed her mother a USB drive with the video recording. "What's this, honey? Another one of your creations?" asked Lisa skeptically. "Mom, it's a recording with Uncle Steve. I haven't watched it. It's for you mainly. You'll understand once you see it." Curious, Lisa slipped the USB into her pocket, but she only managed to watch the video on her work laptop. Her face changed instantly and turned pale from what she saw. Picking up Ava from school earlier than usual, Lisa and her went straight to their old apartment. When Lisa opened the front door, she saw a half-dressed woman being embraced by her husband, Steve. "Get out, both of you. You have no business here. Forget about me and my family," shouted an enraged Lisa, unable to comprehend such betrayal. Quickly getting dressed, Steve's mistress discreetly slipped out of the apartment. But Steve himself, on the other hand, acted defiantly and clearly had no intention of leaving. "What are you staring at, rich lady? Thought you could buy me? Well, think again, all of this is your little brat's fault. But don't worry, I'll get to you real quick now," Steve growled, trying to grab Ava by the hair. But Lisa stepped in, defending her daughter. "Oh, is that how it is? Just you wait, witch, you'll get yours," sneered the man who, now that his deceit was exposed, had nothing left to lose. A scuffle ensued, with the stronger Steve having the upper hand. Poor Ava, crying, ran to the neighboring apartment to call for help from Jake and Uncle Bob. Fortunately, they were home and responded to the girl's plea. Steve had already pinned Lisa to the ground, gripping her throat tightly. But luckily, help arrived just in time. Bob landed several punches on the aggressor, though he took a beating in the process. Steve was practically berserk with rage and seemed to have the strength of 10 men. Finally, with great effort, they managed to subdue the deceptive husband. In the meantime, Lisa called the police and gave her statement right there and then. Steve now faces real jail time for assault and attempted murder. Mom apologized to Ava for not trusting her and not believing her the first time. Moreover, Lisa wanted to thank Bob and give him the car she had once bought for Steve. But to her great surprise, the man declined. "If you don't mind, the best way to thank me would be a modest dinner at the diner by the waterfront. They have good food and it's a beautiful spot." After all she'd been through, Lisa, feeling the need for a change of scenery, gladly agreed. At the cafe, they went with Jake and Ava. The children merrily played, laughing as they launched paper boats that Bob skillfully made from paper napkins. Lisa didn't know that the charming man had long harbored feelings for her but was afraid to admit them, ashamed of his humble circumstances. Of course, Lisa couldn't forget Steve immediately. Ahead of her were a divorce and a trial involving her ex-husband. But after that video on the USB, something inside Lisa snapped, and the romantic haze in her head cleared. Now, she no longer believed sweet-talking men, choosing to trust dependable people, like Bob had proven himself to be. Their feelings for each other didn't blossom overnight, and it took time before Lisa, one fine day, felt she was ready for a new relationship. Bob didn't try to impress her or flatter her excessively, he simply and manfully proposed to the woman he had fallen in love with. Lisa, of course, accepted, to the great delight of Jake and Ava, who had always considered themselves brother and sister, and now could rightfully call each other so. The couple decided against a grand wedding, opting for a modest civil ceremony instead. Bob became a solid pillar of support for Lisa, helping her in work and running the business. Their home was now filled with warmth, love, and abundance. Meanwhile, Ava and Jake eagerly await the spring, which, judging by their parents' conversations, will bring them a baby brother or sister, delivered by the stork.